Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. It's good to see you here today. I'm going to be hosting temporarily. So if you're watching on YouTube, remember you can find out more about what we do on officehours.global. Our first hour is a general discussion of production-related questions. Second hour is typically something where we take a deeper dive into a topic. This week, we're doing a little bit of planning for the next couple of months or maybe the next year, and that is a process of discussing what office hours should look at. So this is your chance as the audience to influence the decisions that are made here. So today we are going to be looking at graphics. So all that said, it's time to dive into the show. Mitch, what have we got here for our first question?
Thank you, Bill. Our first asker is Guy Cochran from Seattle, Washington, and he wants to know, how do you get live video into the cloud?
Since Guy asked the question, let's have him go first and tell us what he's thinking about.
Actually, let's pass it over to Jonas if you don't mind. I wanted to follow up on anything he might have not said. So go
Okay,
Jonas.
fair enough. Jonas, you're up.
In general, there's a couple ways how to get video into the cloud. There are more new ways like NDI remote and stuff like that. One of the trusted ways is if you use any contribution protocol, so that's SRT. Some people like to use RTMP for that or something else, Zoom, WebRTC. With SRT, the interesting thing is in theory, you can send multiple feeds over one SRT pipe, because all SRT is a data pipe where you then send a TS stream over. So you could send multiple. One cool thing that I've seen now is there's a couple of companies coming out with something what they call either a venue gateway or a streaming gateway. Ross has one where they convert the SDI to SRT or NDI for you, and then have a other piece in the cloud that can convert it from SRT or their proprietary protocol to NDI or CDI, all those different ones. And then there's also some magic you can do with custom resolutions that are non-16:9 and not 1080p, like putting together a couple feeds into one frame and then syncing them up that way.
Jonas, I might imagine that this area is unbelievably rife with innovation right now, with a number of eyeballs moving there. Is this evolving like every day? How are you even keeping up with all the new things coming out?
I would say there's probably a new product coming out almost every week. One of the bigger issues is cross compatibility. There's also stuff like with the SMPTE 2110 that you can do, and new compressions like JPEG XS. A lot of the time is with newer standards like 2110, you have a new product that comes out and they say 2110 or they say SRT, which both are good examples for a standard that then can be interpreted. So sometimes the problem is a product comes out, you think, oh, that's great for our workflow. You try it and it doesn't work with the rest of your workflow. So there's a lot of early growing pains still, I would say, in that. And then it's just bandwidth limitations and a lot of discussion between, do I need an uncompressed file and how compressed is visible? And then latency. Latency is also the thing where a lot of people say, like, I really need a low latency feed, where I think if it's not news or sports, you don't. And we have done some remote productions where it didn't matter and the TDs and everyone was fine as soon as they got over the hump of, oh, that's too much latency. So that's kind of a couple different things that are still issues there as the wetware evolves as well.
Do you think the challenges are getting easier or more difficult as this evolves for people getting into it for the first time?
They're getting more diverse. There's a lot more people that offer it as a service, and then you hit the ceiling. One of the things is like, you can't just say, hey, yeah, let's run another SDI cable because you want that specialty camera. You need to have more planning, because like I often found there is these little pieces that can bring the whole thing down. Like, hey, we have 4 cameras synced. It shouldn't be hard to add a 5th one, right? You just add a 5th camera, just another stream, just a 4th more bandwidth. And you're like, no, that doesn't work at all. We need to add 4 more, and those will be synced again. That's kind of some of the issues that you run into there as well, and you try to limit yourself on how many upload streams you need there.
Thank you for the expertise. I know I dwelled on that a little bit because this is such a big issue right now. So many people want to migrate so much into the web that this is one of the core technologies we're going to be living with for the rest of our lives. Mitchell Hill also wanted to say something about that. Mitch?
Yeah, another way to get video into the clouds is to talk to John Preto at Office Hours Space. Okay,
there you go. And Guy Cochran wanted to weigh in on this.
Yeah, that's pretty funny, Mitchell. You're talking about launching it up there. So this one's kind of funny because I knew Jonas knows a lot about it. I wanted to make it super simple, and starting with an app on your iPhone, you could just use Lyrics Broadcaster, and we showed it in the AWS hour that we did with Tucker, where we just used a QR code, and then you open up the camera app on your phone and you scan it, and if you have the Lyrics Broadcaster app, it'll say open this in Lyrics Broadcaster, and you hit the little button to start the stream, and you're streaming. It's literally that simple to send it up. And then we're doing it right now. We're using Zoom. You could use Zoom as a contribution method, and we can screen scrape, and a lot of people do that. And nowadays we're even seeing some cameras though. Like JVC has some cameras with SRT built in, and one of the cameras that I'm using right now, this is the Z-Cam, and Jonas is one of the guys that turned me on to updating my camera. If you see here down at the bottom, there's actually a SRT feed. So if I say start, I can now have an SRT feed coming in to this is just my local. I could fire up an instance, and this would be the same as if it was going into the cloud. But basically, this one now that says SRT 5000, it's a different shot. It's going to be delayed, but yeah. That's now an SRT feed coming in, and that's local, but it could be in the cloud. So that's another way. Is built into a camera. So that's a Z-Cam, but also some of these PTZ cameras are doing it as well, where you can have SRT just right in the camera, which is it's crazy to think about because the latency can be below 500 milliseconds, and so it's super quick. And last but not least, I'd say that Elemental, the way that we're doing it right now, is one of those orange boxes. Alex has the bigger bad boy that's a different color because it's 4K. So that's another way of getting video into the cloud. So a couple different ways.
It looks like Jonas wanted to pop back in on this. Jonas?
And it's one of the things that probably we've seen most for PTZ cameras in the last year. I have a little Canon CRN 300 up there that's about to get SRT into the cloud. BirdDog has a couple one that do SRT to the cloud. And then you get into the interesting, not only latency, but also sync discussion again. How far do you need to sync two cameras? How far off can it be? How close does it need to be? Can the wide camera be a little off? And that's one of the cool things with SRT. It stays. It's not pulsating. It's not changing the latency between receiver and sender because they have buffers on both sides to make sure that the latency stays the same.
Nice. Well, thank you all for helping everybody in the audience and me, because I need to learn this stuff too, get closer to current. Let's move on to the next question.
And it's from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What's a good large file upload service accessible from your business website for clients to submit content? Ease of use is priority, i.e. drag and drop functionality. Accessible from mobile, desired. Any security concerns with such an open service?
We're going to start with Chris Fenwick here. Chris?
I'm sitting here thinking, I just drew a blank on the name of the service. John, it's the one that we're using for the OH Space project. What is the online?
Lucid Link.
Yeah, Lucid Link. Sorry. I'm really on top of this stuff. But the add-on gizmo that our friend Felipe wrote for us is by far the best drag and drop remote contribution or client contribution thing I've seen. I can also mention, because it's public on LinkedIn now, it was kind of embargoed information, but our own Felipe just took a full-time job at a full-time job at Apple. So he's going to be a little hard to get in contact. I don't think we'll see him here on the panel anymore, as is the case when people go and work for the fruit company. But I think he'll still respond on Discord if you're looking for help setting one of those up.
If nothing else, since he's a friend of the show, congratulations. That's great news. Jonas?
I would say security-wise, one of the things you need to keep in mind is most of services, as soon as you go over 2 gigabytes, will charge you by the gigabyte for storage. If you have a completely free, if you have a completely open without security service, you can just wait a couple weeks, probably a couple hours if your website has some decent traffic, till some bot crawler finds your upload portal and uses it for all the things you don't want your portal used and cost you a lot of money.
Ooh, ouch. That's a scary thing, but it's a good warning. Courtney.
Yeah, Jonas is exactly right. Anytime you have easy access to a remote storage portal, it will be filled by spam bots and porn servers and everything else unsavory in just a minute. I use Google Drive if I have to send or receive large files from clients, because I can send them a link and they can just drag and drop files onto a private drive that I've set up that I give them access to through a link. So it makes it fairly easy to do security. But just having an open place where just drag your file here is going to be discovered by bots almost instantaneously.
So if you're going to do that, I guess the suggestion here is open it up, get your files, and close it down ASAP. Chris Fenwick has the thought again. Chris?
Yeah, a point that most people don't think about when they talk about a solution for doing this is if you need to keep in sync with files, it can be very problematic. Although, and then the other problem is when you have many files to download in a complex folder structure, some of the services don't work like at all. There's Box, there's Dropbox, Google Drive. Google Drive is hugely problematic when you have a lot of files to deal with and very, very large files. Some of the services won't, force you to scan everything before you download it, and then it says, "Oh, I can't scan that. It's too big. So you're just going to have to download it anyway." And then if you try to download multiple files, it'll make you, it'll zip it together. But I'm talking about, okay, so I have 2 gigabytes worth of stuff to download, and it doesn't want to make a 2 gig zip file. So it sits and it churns, and then it comes back and it goes, "Nah, I don't want to do this." And so you have to look at the whole workflow when you're thinking about using some sort of service. Try it. How much data are you actually going to move? How many files are you actually going to move? Try it. Because on the receiving end, it can be hugely problematic when you have, and I mean like insanely problematic when you have large files or many, many files.
Yeah, I also remember back when Frame.io was first coming out that in I think their second round of venture capital financing, they spent a huge chunk of that. I don't think it was tens, I think it was hundreds of millions of dollars on their security infrastructure. So some of these big portals that specialize in upload and download realize that these are issues and do their best to address it. Let's move on to the next question.
Bo Cordell from Charleston, South Carolina. And he'd ask, does anyone have a good method to convert RS-232 serial data to and from audio? I have a serial data feed that I'd love to record alongside video, then convert it back to data during playout.
Boy, I haven't had a question about RS-232 serial data in a long time, so congratulations, Bo. Let's start with Dennis Champion Walker on this.
Thanks, Bill. Essentially, this is the job of a modem. It turns audio into a data stream and vice versa. I was having a look before the show and found someone who had done a project with an Arduino to convert web audio direct from a browser into RS-232. You can see that page there. I'll share the link in the chat in a moment. So it's clearly possible. But there's a lot to think about, and I think this article goes into some of the details of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonas.
How do you think about storing it as a captioning file or in the CEC codec of the SDI?
Okay, good. Courtney?
Yeah, convert it to data and store it as part of the metadata in a file. It depends on the bit rate that you're trying to do. You could, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, go out to your thrift store and look for one of these CAT modems, acoustic modem, and just hook up some wires, take off those little acoustic couplers, and connect the microphone when you want to convert it back, and connect the earphone when you want to convert it to, and record it as a spare audio track on your video as it goes out. And then when you play it back, you just feed it back into the audio, and you get RS-232 right out of that modem through that 25-pin serial port on the side. It probably only does 2400 baud, but you might find some 56Ks out there that are acoustic.
Wonder if you need a Model A car battery to power that. We're going back. If you can find an acoustic coupler modem, hats off to you. That would be fun as a project. Let's move on to the next one.
Guy Cochran from Seattle, Washington. How is office hours planning for IBC going?
I haven't heard of that, and Alex, since he's not here today, would probably have to inform us about how the overall thing is going on. Jonas, you have some thoughts?
Going great. There's a core team building, and we're working out the details. And as we go forward, we're looking forward to having a couple volunteers. It probably will be a little bit earlier than the normal office hours, so we don't catch all the booths as they try to pack down to get into the after exhibition. But I think it's going to be a great event.
I've always wanted to go to Amsterdam. In fact, I had tickets one year to go to IBC, and things just came up. A client booked literally a whole month of mine and pushed into that, and I wasn't able to go, and I'm bummed still to this day about it. IBC is a great show. Let's move on to the next question.
Michael Fosbein from Woodstock, Georgia. What are Courtney's comments on his Rodecaster Pro 2? I like the FX better in the DBX 286s. Both are consumer-grade products, right?
Courtney?
They are consumer-based products. I'm liking it pretty good. I think the quality is pretty good. I'm kind of getting used to the user interface. And it comes in especially handy if you want to play God.
Yes, you must build me an ark, Noah.
So, it has all of those built-in effects. And the ability to play back, the touchpads and the ability to play back music cues on cue is really good. The arrangement, I'm still trying to get my head around the arrangement of the USB buses, because there's a chat bus, and then there's a main bus, and then there's two USB ports on it so that you can bring in a second USB device as a source, like a phone call or something coming over another computer over USB, or a Skype call, something like that. So I haven't quite gotten to the bottom of all the routing, and I wish there were a better way to have some kind of, maybe their app, I haven't loaded up the app yet, to physically show the routing and the layout of the routing to give you a diagram of what's routed where, because it's really almost impossible to get your head around with some of the routing, because it does mix minuses internally, but it doesn't show you how it's doing it and what's routed where. But it does have pretty quiet mic preamps, and it's very flexible, and its flexibility is great. I don't like the recording. I got to check it again. It's on version 4 of the firmware updates in just about 2 weeks. So they went through 4 firmware updates in the first few days of its being released. I don't think it records ISO files on its recorder, but I don't think it timestamps them. It doesn't record broadcast wave ISO files, so they're not necessarily timestamped. And last time I checked, the timestamps on the files, the file time and date that it records the files on the SD card with, didn't match the clock of the built into the Rodecaster. So there's still some bugs in there with recording, and I wish they would record broadcast wave files with integrated timecode so that when you pull all those ISO tracks out, you could easily sync them up to each other to the frame.
Great review. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate Courtney's hands-on with the box. I could tell you this: about 8 years ago, Adam Curry, the original Podfather, started to build a podcasting tool, basically aiming at something like what you have there, Courtney. And I actually did some work for him, edited some promo videos and whatnot. He was doing a GoFundMe, didn't raise enough money, wasn't able to do it. Adam's background in this and understanding of what you need to do a show with remote contributors is exemplary. His shows sound amazing. They really do. And I will tell you that he bought the first Podcaster, and he said the internal routing was completely unusable. He bought this one as an experiment, and he said that the internal routing was enthusiastic thumbs up. Very pleased with what they implemented. He's not crazy about the sound, but the routing capabilities is important. So, Courtney, I'd be really interested in hearing your opinions after you dig a little deeper into the online manual to understand more of it, because Adam was very pleased with the internal routing, and he said finally somebody built a box and they did it right. So and again, Adam has great sounding shows.
So it sounds like Michael Vosby needs to hold on to this question, bring it back again, but let's go to Mitchell and Courtney to finish up real quick.
Yeah, other than all those good news and reviews, how does it look on your desk, Courtney?
It looks nice. I show you a picture, but I don't have it up right now. The one other thing I was going to say, there we go. Our cracked graphics team, that was Fenwick. We should be on the cracked graphics team. That's
not the crack graphics team. That's just Fenwick.
That's just Fenwick. Okay. The Curtis Judd did a really good hands-on review of the Rodecaster Pro 2. So you can go to his website if you want to see a good review of the system. And I don't like their help file because it's arranged as a web pages. It's web HTML based, and so you can't just turn the pages on it. You have to, go through links to get to the point that you want. It's difficult to index, and you don't discover any stuff just by turning through it. You can't just go page to page because it's all hyperlinked.
I love the fact that it's a party on your desk, though. Let's move on to the next question.
Kodiak Adams from California. I've been asked to get instant replay going on a jumbotron at a soccer stadium. Does anyone have any suggestions for software or hardware that simplifies the process of instant replay?
It looks like Guy Cochran's going to take a shot at this. Guy?
Yeah, some people use vMix and software. It's not the most elegant. There's the big EVSs at the high end. There is a product from Roland that's in the $2,500 range that looks pretty reasonable. We're hearing good things about it, so I would recommend this Roland, and I'll put a link in the chat.
Excellent answer. All right, Chris Widener. I'm sorry, the next question, please.
Is from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Someone had mentioned a VESA mountable USB monitor a while back, and I couldn't seem to find it. Does anyone remember which one that was?
I think many monitors have the 4 holes in the back which adapt to VESA mounting. That's either, I think there's 2 versions, 100 millimeter hole distance and 75. So I think make sure that you have a monitor that doesn't have them, because it's almost the default now that most everybody who's making some kind of monitors puts one form of this so that you don't have to use clamps and that kind of stuff to mount them. Courtney, you have a thought on it?
Maybe he's thinking about these portable monitors like this one. They're really thin. They power off a USB-C with a single plug. This is a 15-incher. What I did, because they're designed as portable monitors, and they have a case that flips open that works as a little stand for them. What I did is I put some of these command strips, see if you can see them on the back there, and then I 3D printed my own VESA monitor mount like this. Only instead of holes for the VESA mount, I just made a flat surface, and then I put a couple of command strips on this, and snaps on to that command Velcro, which is a hard type Velcro, and then it gives me this adjustable angle monitor mount right there.
Excellent.
And you could use any commercial VESA mount as well, and put the command strips on those. I just happen to 3D print.
Will the Courtney mount be available in retail form anytime soon?
Maybe not in retail. It's maybe I'll put it on Thingiverse or something. There you download it, print it out yourself.
Guy Cochran also wants to get into this.
Yeah, there's one that our friend Tucker Dragoo uses, and Greg Gibson and I are both lusting after this one. It's on sale for $200 off for Prime Day. It is called the UPerfect portable monitor. This one, the difference is that it's 4K, it's a 17-inch, and it's USB-C, and it has the VESA mount. So it's called UPerfect, and I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, and also if you want to use lightweight things, I use these guys. Let me see if I can get it up here where you can actually see it. This is a Ulanzi mount. It's a very wide claw-type mount. And for these really, really low-weight IPS panels, it does a really solid job. That's how actually I have both of my monitors fixed. Let's see. I'm not getting my back signal. Sorry about that. That camera must not be on. But I have both of my monitors mounted by this. They have them in both plastic and metal if you want more stability. So it's just a clamp and an arm that'll handle one of those really easily. So lots of different options for you. Next question.
And it's from Fred Eric Eckert in Bad Erdenam, Germany. I've captured an on-site event for client. The speaker was using sequences from 2 movies, Mendalorian and Ford versus Ferrari, in his slides for explanation. The customer wants to upload the entire event to YouTube. Strikes? Licensing issues?
We're going to start with Jonas.
So with YouTube, you always have to look at it from 2 different perspectives. One of them is the legal thing. Are you allowed to use that footage in a commercial product? And that's a question where you'll have to reach out to either the licensing holder or consider your local laws. Then the other way is, what does YouTube think you're allowed to do with it? And often those 2 are completely separate. So you might have the licensing, but if you don't have a way of telling YouTube you have the licensing, or the license holder who would flag it to YouTube has a way of telling you are allowed to upload that video, that still doesn't help you. One helpful little function, if it's not a live stream, is YouTube now allows you to upload a video, and in the last step, before you put it live, before you risk any strikes or anything, you can check if it's eligible. So in this case, I just uploaded a test file. It's fine. There is no copyright found in there. And then you're safe. This should be the same copyright check that you get, that you would get if you didn't do the checks before. If you are intending to go live, create yourself a backup account for live, stream there. Ideally, you stream the whole event public if it's a restreamed type of thing, because public and unlisted and private sometimes gets handled differently in the different strikes. And then YouTube will pop up a little warning. Hey, make sure that you stop playing that video into your live stream, or otherwise we'll shut it off. And then you'll know it. So that's the standard practice for us. During rehearsal, we let the whole video run internally and stream to a second account, so we can see if YouTube gets angry. If YouTube gets angry, video will not be shown.
Fair enough. And also remember that we are a global show, which means that here in the U.S., that's handled by Title 17 of the U.S. Copyright Act, and that's going to determine sometimes whether you have permission to do that. That may not exist it won't exist in other countries, and you may have local laws that determine whether something is a copyright violation or not. So just always beware. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael weighs in. He says, Jonas mentioned running another SDI cable. In my experience, crimp-on cat cables are easy to make quickly. Wouldn't SDI cables be much harder?
Jonas?
Yes, but also you should never go to an event without spare SDI cables, because they do break. So if you need to have 2 cameras run, might as well bring 3 to 4 cables. That's what I meant. I didn't mean bring a whole spool of SDI cable and crimp them live. That would be a little unpractical. And I think you would find a lot of people being angry at you at that. If you plan early enough, that might be a possibility, but just bring spares and run a spare.
Fair enough. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. The projector we've been using for movie in the parks has met an untimely end. It was a 10-year-old Epson Powerlite 935-watt 3700 lumen 3CD. I'm researching what we can get to replace it under $2,000. Suggestion?
And Nigel's going to pop in for this one. Nigel?
Okay, so $2,000 is a really difficult price point because you're going to flip between consumer and semi-consumer. So here's one that I found for you, which is the Epson 4010, which fits within your price band. it says it's 4K, but it's really not 4K. It's really 1080 upscaled. So beware of everything in this price range. I guess the real question is, what are you feeding it? Because that old projector, I don't think took 1080 either. So work out what you're feeding it, work out how bright you need it to be, how many lumens. But at that price point, you're going to be midway between a 1080 and, if you're really lucky, a secondhand 4K one.
There you go. Courtney wants to weigh in.
Yeah, question on that, Nigel. Is it 1080 upscaled or is it 4K downscaled to 1080 for projection? Because usually that would be the other way around to get more brightness out, to go to 1080 for projection. And it could take a 4K input that it would downscale to 1080. Is that right? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that projector.
Yeah, when I read about it, because we're looking for one for our building, and we're looking at the Sunny one, which is nearly $6,000, because that's really a 4K. This one, if you read the stuff, I remember it saying something about it. It's sort of upscaled effectively, that it's not downscaled. It's you'll notice that there's all sorts of, where it says 4K, there'll be a footnote, and then if you follow the footnote, it'll tell you what it is.
This is why everybody says reading manuals are so important. It tells you the subtle differences back there. Let's move on to the next question.
Next question in from James Fosseline in Minneapolis, Minnesota. How do you troubleshoot the highest-end computer setup for photogrammetry with graphics issues, artifacts on monitors, or mouse cursor position mismatch? Can you trust the recommended drivers from Dell?
Oh, and this is one of those points where we would have hoped that Alex would have been here, because he's such a photogrammetry maven, if I can use that term. I mean, he spends a lot of time thinking about studying that, I think much more than any of us on the panel. So it doesn't look like any of us. Well, Courtney's willing to weigh in. Let's see what Courtney has to say.
Well, I'll just give you a generic answer in that, most issues with graphics have to do with the drivers, and make sure you have the latest drivers. And if the manufacturer of the hardware doesn't have them available, hasn't updated their drivers, and frequently Dell won't update their drivers except until after 3 years after the new reference drivers come out. You can go to the chipset manufacturer's website. They will have the latest drivers for that chipset. You have to find out who made the video card and what chipset it is, and go to either ATI, usually, or an NVIDIA, and download the latest reference drivers for that particular chipset that you have, and that might solve your problem. But that doesn't guarantee that it won't interfere with other stuff on that hardware. Supposedly the manufacturer, like Dell, will test the drivers with their hardware, with the mouse driver, and make sure that it's not competing for interrupts or having screen buffering issues or things like that. But it's a bit of a nightmare. But if the drivers from the manufacturer of the computer don't work, go to the reference drivers from the manufacturer of the video card.
Fair enough. Move on to the next question.
And it's coming in from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. I've agreed to help a friend get some fair footage for a project. There are 3 fairs near me in the next 3 weeks. Is there anything needing to testing for a portable rig that this is an opportunity for? And
Guy Cochran is going to start us out.
Yeah, I would look at either renting or buying a Ronin-type gimbal where you can get some nice high-energy shots. Just be looking for people that you can, and things that you can get with a moving, like either walking and carefully holding the phone and the rig. And so I would be testing, if I'm using even an iPhone at the cheapest level, testing Filmic Pro. If you want to try recording in 4K, you might want to do additional stabilization, even if it's 1080 project. So I'd be testing the workflow out, as well as just practicing getting a person in the shot. Like I've taken a piece of string and wrapped it around a pole, and then did six feet, and then said, okay, I know that if my subject's 6 feet away, I know exactly what 6 feet looks like, and I can practice that same 6 feet over and over and over again. So when I'm on site, I know exactly what 6 feet looks like, and I can get in focus really quick. Otherwise, you want a camera that you can focus with. Depends on if you're using manual lenses versus autofocus, but that's another thing to test, is how good is your autofocus? Is it tracking eyeballs, faces? What's it locking onto?
Courtney Gooden.
One good little thing, I have the original Osmo Pocket. You might look at that from DJI, because it's a tiny little, if you haven't seen a 3-axis 4K camera, there's no moving parts in it other than the gimbal itself, and has tiny little motors, so it doesn't weigh hardly anything. So you can put it on really high impact rides, take it with you on a roller coaster or any other fast moving rides, and it'll take the bounce and jump out of the ride. You just hold it in your hand, and it's easy enough to hold in your hand and carry throughout the fair and get some good walking and moving shots that are stabilized. That would be my suggestion. As long as you don't have to do live. If you don't have to do live, then that's a way to go and collect a lot of footage.
I'm going to support this idea of using your phone. You know, they spent so much money, particularly Apple, I think, and Samsung. I'm not as familiar with the Samsung products, but I know Apple has tossed a ton of research and development into those phone cameras. And I have been astonished when I've been in high contrast situations, and a fair is a high contrast nightmare. You've got incredibly bright neon lit things like Ferris wheels and things like that. You often are at night and have a black background. That makes some of the most compelling things. And the computational photography aspects of these modern phones and their ability to expose properly for complex circumstances, it just continues to amaze me. I was actually at Disneyland and I shot some stuff with my phone, I think at California Adventure, and all of it came out looking way, way better than my expectations. So I would take along your phone. Gimbals can be really useful. I use a DJI Osmo 4, which is a last generation one, and I've gotten really, really good results in terms of handheld and carried steady shots. So look forward to it. Don't be frightened of it. Oh, one more thing. I was surprised. I had done a lot of it with Filmic Pro, which is a great program, and I love it. It is very manual, though. And when I shifted down to the standard iPhone video, just tapping on the little photo button and choosing video and setting the camera up for HDR, the system for HDR, I got some pretty spectacular results that really played back on my computer, and I was able to edit in Final Cut that just looked fabulous. Again, I think that's all those engineers in the background trying to make this something that consumers can use and get really outstanding results. I've been impressed. So those are just some thoughts. Oh, Chris Fenwick wants to get on this as well. Chris?
Yeah, Chris, I'll tell you, it's interesting. We as a collective brain trust tend to, we hear a question and we immediately go to like, oh, I need this gimbal, I need this camera, I need this light, I need this cable. I will tell you, go on YouTube and search for, and I'll try and put it in the event chat, search for Watchtower of Turkey. And it is a delightful edit, because I think what you really want is not like what camera do I want to shoot it with. What you really want is, how am I going to shoot it? And Watchtower of Turkey is just an amazingly beautiful video that is festive and has color and texture and an amazing shooting style. Watch that and then figure out what you need. The answer to the question is not always which camera do I need, but how do I use the camera that I already have?
Amen to that. And Mr. D'Alessandri, who did that, what a native talent. And in fact, he's doing high-end stuff. He just released another one, and I'm not even going to mention its name. It is about one of the largest countries in the world. I want you to start. I think Chris's advice is so spot on that you really should go back and watch the one that he did, I think it was 6 years or 7 years ago, literally making one of the most compelling pieces of video I've ever watched as an amateur. I mean, he was not a video professional at the time he made that first one.
Could have fooled me. Watchtower Turkey is
stunning.
Gorgeous.
It really is stunning. And it does the job of giving you an insight into a culture that you wouldn't have seen in a way that is so compelling that you can't take your eyes off it. Really brilliant piece of video making. And it started his career, because now he's making his living doing things like this.
Look at our graphics department. Look at that.
Yeah, look at that. They're so good. All right. Yeah, tip of the week, go watch Watchtower of Turkey. It's fabulous. Oh, Courtney wants to get in on it before we leave.
Yeah, I was just going to say, add one other thing is that if you're going to be stealing the stuff, basically going into a fair unannounced and necessarily without getting any kind of shooting permission, the more consumer-based equipment you use, like a phone, like Bill suggested, because everybody has a phone and shoots video at the fair, or the Osmo Pocket, which is very unobtrusive, you're not going to attract a lot of attention to yourself and get yourself kicked out of the park for shooting something commercial. If you go in there with a full, rig that gimbal rig and
leave your
red
digital
camera
clapper
or something
board at
like
home.
that. Yeah, and a boom man and a sound engineer. Yeah, they're gonna
Boom
they're
mic's not a good idea.
Yeah, no.
Courtney makes a really good point. All right, let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, you got to watch out for those clown bouncers. They're nasty. Todd Perry in Prescott, Arizona. I've been routing scratch audio using Audio Hijack from a Zoom ISO to HDMI inputs of the ATEM ISO for syncing later in post. Is there a better way to do this?
We're going to go to Chris Fenwick in a second, but I got to mention Clown Bouncer is a fabulous name for a band. Just saying, folks. Okay, Chris, take it away.
So first of all, Todd, yeah, quite possibly. It might involve two computers. I understand what you're doing. It's important to remember with Zoom ISO and the HDMI outputs that you're getting from Zoom ISO, it sounds like you're doing very similar to what I do. It's very important to remember that you can route the audio from Zoom ISO out those HDMI outputs. You probably don't need a scratch audio. I'm 100% certain you can get your audio on your HDMI ISOs. That's what I do. You're working super hard to do this. I think it's a lot easier than what you might think. So poke around or reach out on Discord, but you can get your audio from Zoom ISO on those HDMI outputs.
And Jonas wants to pop in on this as well before we finish.
One thing to keep in mind why it's as easy as Chris says is the ISO file of the different inputs includes program audio, not the audio of that input. So all you need to do is send it out of one HDMI, enable it in the ATEM, so it's the program audio of that ISO, and then you have it, and then you'll have scratch tab on all of those.
And that's why in the ATEM ISO folder of stuff it records, it also does record the ISO audio for each track. Of course, Zoom ISO, as of today's recording, July 13th, 2022, summer, does not have ISO audio out of Zoom ISO.
Okay, moving on to the next question.
Andre Dole at Berlin. We have a Vimeo Pro account, which I sometimes use for cloud recording and restreaming to the customer destination. Should I do this always to have a cloud backup and accept the additional latency? Other caveats?
So Vimeo Pro, like many things, these content distribution networks each have their own place. I've had a Vimeo Pro account since almost they were first available, and I use it differently. I also have a Frame.io account, and I now have a Lucid Link account, and I find there are subtle differences with all of them that determines whether or not I choose one. This is just personal for me, but the things about Vimeo Pro that I like, first and foremost, it is incredibly linkable. So if you want to embed video on websites everywhere, it makes it super easy to use Vimeo as your content distribution host. It's really good if we're grabbing a link to your Vimeo video and embedding it anywhere you want to. Now, there are other services that do this. I'm not saying it's the only one, but I'm saying they make it super easy to do that. They also tend to get around firewalls in some circumstances. So I use it a lot for corporate distribution. Companies, particularly large companies that will block YouTube from their systems, thinking that they don't want their employees or associates to spend too much time cruising YouTube, would often leave Vimeo unblocked because it was less popular than YouTube, at least in the mid days. I don't know if this is all still true, but these are the kind of reasons that I use Vimeo. Now, as a cloud backup for raw footage, I'm not so sure. I'm not sure whether I would feel comfortable doing that. The world is changing to accepting the fact that video repositories in the cloud are going to be more and more important as things go by. But at the same time, these rasters for video are getting bigger and bigger, which means the files are getting larger and larger. So I'm not sure I would want to spend the time necessary, even with the faster speeds that we're getting, to move whole raw footage pools up into Vimeo. I see it more as a finished work content distribution network, and I think that's what it's designed primarily to do. So not a horrible idea, but think it through and decide. I'm not sure they're promoting it as a cloud backup service per se. Jonas wants to pop in on this.
As this one goes not so much about the on-demand and storage aspect, but more for the like restreaming aspect of video. If you don't need to use it, don't use it. I've never seen a platform where I've had so many issues with streaming to then Vimeo. Every single time I go live on it, something else is broken. If you don't need to use a thing in the middle between you and your destination, don't use it, especially if there's no advantages. If you need a secondary record, I also wouldn't trust Vimeo to do that backup recording. Just record it locally again, and if you go to YouTube or any other CDN, they will also be able to record it for you. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Let's move on to the next question.
The Seventh Scroll in Brooklyn, New York. What's your favorite CDN for embedding video privately on web pages, live and or pre-recorded? We've been looking at Wistia and Vimeo Pro, but looking for any suggestions and recommendations. AWS?
Let's go to Guy Cochran.
Yeah, I would still use Vimeo /Livestream for the live stuff, but for stuff that you want to embed in a web page later, we use Wistia, and there's a couple of reasons why. So here's a project. Let's say this one here, mounting the smartphone adapter. So here you can actually go through and you can see in the analytics where people, if this stuff's important to you, you can actually see where engagement dropped off, similar to what you can see in YouTube. But here you can actually see where people are coming from. So sometimes we'll see like, hey, right here, people rewatched. There's a hot spot there. So this means that they replayed that. And that was on July 7th. That person was from Airtel Networks or on a mobile phone. And you can see if they fully watched the video 100% or if they bailed out. And the other nice thing about these is that you can customize them, and you can do things like put a password on there. You can have a call to action. You can put links. You can also do captions, which is really cool. You can order the captions, or we use an outside service because these guys charge like $2 and we can get them for $1. So then you can upload the SRT file. And the interesting thing about that is when you go to actually embed and share, so you got all these inline embed, pop over, email campaign, share, but you can also inject the SEO metadata. So what we do is we take the metadata from the captions and we could push that in and they pop up in Google. So there's a lot of reasons to use Wistia, even though it costs $100 a month. So we've been using it for years and love it. So that's my recommendation.
Jonas Dottel.
I would say the same. If you are looking for a CDN for non-live videos, there's a lot of choices there. One of the big important things, if you go to a CDN that's not YouTube or Vimeo, or even for Vimeo, is keep in mind how large is your audience. If your audience is over a couple thousand people, Vimeo might also knock on your door suddenly wanting more money in the middle of like a 5-day project. So what you then also want to keep in mind is, are you looking for a CDN that takes your RTMP feed and does all the different quality transcodings as well, and then put it on their CDN? Because that's a different part than just hiring a CDN. If you take someone like Akamai, Cloudflare has an offering, AWS CloudFront, they all can do the CDN part. So basically, as soon as you have your HLS ladder and have your different segments, they can send them out to the whole world. Then AWS has a very easy service called IVS that manages all of that. They have their own player that works fairly well. Cloudflare now has an offering for a CDN that you can embed, and all of those will charge you by some form of per viewer. If it's per bandwidth or per minute watched, that's what I would use. And then obviously you can also cobble together stuff if you want, like have a instance in AWS that then creates the HLS ladder, does the different transcode, and puts it on Akamai or something else.
Chris Van Wyck.
I just want to say to the audience that when I sit here and I listen to people like Guy and Jonas and Nigel talking about projectors, I expect at any point, any day, to be asked to leave this panel, because the level of knowledge and expertise that you guys have in your fields makes me feel, I think the word I'm looking for is stupid. So you guys are amazing. It's just, it blows me away on a daily basis. It's a pleasure to spend time with you, even if I'm about to be asked to leave.
You're not, Chris. And amen to the sentiment, though. This panel has always attracted so many people who have been so impressive. I'm amazed at what we manage to do every day here. Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, Chris, don't sell yourself too short. You can always be a reader like me. Olivier Richard from Saigon, Vietnam. Besides the birding show with Lois and Conversations with Tony Mobley, are there any other shows using office hours technology and support? What would you be interested in?
And we'll start with Dennis Champion Walker.
So, yeah, one of the big ones that wasn't mentioned there is the Belfast method. There's a number of us from office hours who go and help out the accidental theatre on a semi-regular basis. They were doing shows specifically to train up office hours people previously. Those haven't happened recently, but there are improv nights every Sunday, and we run the cameras for those. And there are some other events that are coming up that they're doing. There's a play coming up in the next few days, for example. And so, yeah, we're involved in the behind the scenes of that.
Yeah, and we shouldn't forget our coverage of events, which we got into for a while. It's been a little quieter the last couple of weeks, and I think there's some things coming up at IVC's the next big one for that. And it's one of those circumstances where you get to see the potential of the kind of show that we do for bringing information to the masses via live streaming on the internet. Mitch Hill is going to talk next.
And not to forget our good friend John Preto and Office Hours Space. That was an excellent example of our ability to cover an event and make it interesting as a story, too.
Tony Mobley.
And I didn't want us to forget that there were cooking shows in the past, and some of those cooking shows are being updated and will be returning. So that will be something else to look forward to.
Right. It was really, we learned a lot from Matt in the kitchen, and for the ones that Alex was doing with Hazma Gajar's wife, Demonte. We've had a lot of things where we mount these things because we want to learn how to mount shows like this. And that provides an incredible opportunity for those of you who are in the audience who think, I'd like to know more about the technology of how we actually get live shows on the air of this type. And it's been an amazing thing to be able to work with and hang with all sorts of people with all sorts of amazing skills. Next question.
And from Andre Dole in Berlin, M1 MacBook Pro Unity Bluetooth issue. When using Unity, the sound over Bluetooth headphones recently is heavily disturbed. Tried different models, just reinstalled OSX and Unity, and the issue still remains. Any ideas? The issue appears only in Unity.
And it looks like Chris Fenwick has a thought on it. Chris?
Yeah, Andre, I don't have a specific answer for you, sorry. But I will say that recently I had to actually leave my little cave here and go do a show in the real world with real people and actual equipment. And I actually took my laptop and my Apple short cable, my little earbud things, and I used it as my comm. And I very carefully balanced, I'm going to use the left ear for rehearsal and the right ear for a half hour before the show. And then I put them, I kept swapping the charger and I got through the whole show. It was like a 3-hour show. But I did not have that problem. So it is possible, but possibly a better solution is to not rely on a wireless tool like I did for your comms.
Olivier Richard wants to speak on this. Olivier?
Yeah, I have exactly the same issue, and it's not being solved. So what I have for the show is this ear monitor, the Aftershock, which leaves the ear completely free of access. And then I use a normal earbuds with this little Rode Wireless Go 2. This is actually the receiver, not the transmitter, the receiver, and the microphone is plugged in with a TRRS cable to my jack and my Mini, and I have no problem with Unity anymore. This is the way around it. So 2 systems. This one for the Aftershocks Com, I think it's called, for office hours and Zoom, and this one for Unity, and it works just perfectly.
I do the same thing with the Rode, Olivier. If I'm not wearing the headphones, that's what I use, and it works great. It doesn't make any sense. I'll say this: it doesn't make any sense that it should work. Like just when you just read the feature set, it's like, oh, that'll never work, and yet it does.
Moving on. Oh, no, Peter Sargent wanted to weigh in on this. Peter, go ahead.
I was going to say the way I solved that problem, because I haven't confirmed yet whether whether Unity is actually M1 native or is still going through Rosetta 2, which may cause some stuttering in the code. You know, that may be the problem, as Chris is suddenly saying, I haven't confirmed it yet. But so I
was using an old MacBook Pro.
Yeah. I'm using my iPhone for Unity and using a pair of Aftershocks, so much the same way as Olivier said, which is go two completely different paths, and they won't step on each other.
All right, moving on to the next question.
Todd Perry, Prescott, Arizona. Is there a way to transfer an already scheduled Zoom meeting to another's account and license, and would it use the upgraded resolution of that account?
Jonas.
Especially if we're talking about another account that uses a completely different organization. No, what you can do is you can start a meeting within an account. So different users under one account, you can make them an alternative host, and then they can start the meeting, which would sadly still not transfer the license. So if you have account A where you schedule this meeting and account B where you have the 1080p license, you will need to reschedule the meeting under account B. One of the tricks that I always like to tell everyone, never send out the raw Zoom links for production. Always put it in a quick link short note that you have the control over. So if something like this happens, nobody needs to know. All you can say is, oh yeah, there might be an issue. Just click the link again. It should be working now. And suddenly everyone is on the right place. That's a little trick that I would always use. Other than that, not easily. There's no way to transfer it to another account.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. My mom may be going into SNF full-time, and I'm thinking of some ideas for iOS apps I could develop to help make her life easier and help build my iOS development skills. What I do is a touchscreen food ordering app. Any ideas?
That's a nursing facility, and Nigel wants to get into that. So do Chris and Courtney, but we're going to start with Nigel.
Yeah, so my mother and father are not in a secure nursing facility, but I have to tell you, every time the iOS interface changes, it causes dramatic problems for us. And I don't know whether Apple understand this or care, but little changes of image cause my mother confusion. And the hardest thing, I call her on FaceTime or I call her on WhatsApp or something, and she can never find it. So here's what I would like. I would like a very simple phone app with big buttons like they used to have on the old-time phones, which doesn't have all the fancy features, that doesn't get very complicated, but would allow me to make simple phone calls. And I appreciate I could buy a Portal or a Google thing or one of those things, but all of that would just provide confusion as well.
iOS or Swift developers, there's your cue. You can invent something called Visit Me that is to those specifications. I think you'd make some money. Chris Fenwick, take it away.
I'm so glad you asked this about the phone thing. My mother has the same problem. Half the time when she calls me, she's not using the speakerphone mode, but she's sitting there with the phone talking like this, and I can barely hear her, and she can't hear me. In the iPhone accessibility section, there are two features that I would highly recommend if you have an elderly or any person that has issues. And obviously there's security issues, that's why they're not automatically on. One, you can tell the iPhone, and this was huge with my mom, just always use the speakerphone. It defaults to speakerphone. And since that's the way my mom doesn't want to hold the phone to her head, oh, my hand's going asleep. She just wants to lay it down and talk. The other feature is super controversial, and I had a long talk with my mom about this. The other feature is auto answer. It just, after one ring, it just answers. And if you make a FaceTime call, it'll just automatically answer. And my mom's, it's like having an intercom to my mom's house. Hey, Mom, how you doing? Oh, honey, are you here? No, Mom, I'm on the nightstand. Oh, it's so nice to hear your voice, you know. And if you make a FaceTime call, it'll auto answer. My mom's phone has a little flip over case, and when she closes it, it just hangs up. It turns the case into like a hang up mechanism. But those two can be used in very nefarious ways, those two features, but they're hugely beneficial to my mother. She loves it.
Great. We hit the top of the hour, so I'm going to go over a little bit here and finish up the last couple of questions here. But let's keep things as concise as we can. Courtney and then John real quick.
Yeah, good suggestions on the phone. That's always a problem. And of course, people that are entering secure nursing facilities a lot of times have vision problems. So dealing with something with large buttons, or if you have a big screen display that you can put in their room, that is very handy. And maybe having an interface between the iPad and an Apple TV, let's say, on the big screen, so that they can see what they're clicking on and watching there. As far as a menu selection, that's going to be a problematic, because in most secure nursing facilities, the food is all prepared by a dietitian based on doctor's prescriptions and things like that. So a lot of times there's very little choice that the residents have in choosing. They might be able to choose from item number 1 or item number 2, but there's not a lot of flexibility in the diet there, and you would have to get approval and have to interface with the dietitian and the food prep of the facility to do any type of menuing type of program.
Okay, John, real quick.
Can Chris do the remainder of the show in his mom's voice? That would be great.
That would be fabulous. Let's move on. Douglas Carmichael's up next.
Many concerts have used 3D graphics and animation synchronized to the music with a click track. Are there 3D applications in Blender and Cinema 4D that allow you to import audio files and animate with them?
Mitch, as quick as you can.
Short answer is yes.
That was pretty quick. Congratulations. Do you have any suggestions for anybody as to what they might be, or do you want to just
There's a timeline track in Cinema 4D which would allow you to set tracking points to do different things in Cinema 4D. Blender is a little bit more convoluted, and I don't profess to be an expert on it.
Excellent answer. Thank you. Douglas Carmichael's next. Let's go to the next question.
The Airbus family is known for its ECAM, or Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitor, which gives the crew specific steps to follow to resolve a fault or issue. Could you see manufacturers in our industry providing that sort of onboard guidance?
And Olivier, real quick.
Okay, Douglas, I don't know how you came up with this question. The very short the short answer is no way. In just a couple of words, an Airbus A320, it's 57 computers talking to one another. And for example, and the ECAM gives you procedure in case of any malfunctions. And the beauty of that system is when you have another malfunction coming on top of it, it prioritizes which one is the most important and then stack the procedure in the proper order. Now, you could do that in any industry in the world if you have a holistic system. But in every setup that you have in audiovisual, everything is different. I don't think there is a single show that looks like one another. In the Airbus family, an Airbus is an Airbus. It's coming out of the factory in the same way. So it's perfectly doable. I don't think we'll be able to mimic the ACAM system on the in the audiovisual industry. No.
That was an exceptional answer, Olivier. Really, thank you. I wish I almost had a couple more minutes for that, but let's move on. We, as you know, this week are going through and asking those of you who watch the show or participate in the show to give us your ideas of what we should do going forward. We talked a little bit about audio yesterday. Today is graphics. Tomorrow is video. So for those of you who have questions and want to talk about it, if you want to pop pop your thoughts into, just raise your hand in the second hour question graphics. And if you don't, that's okay. Alex was going to run this, and he knows a lot about this topic. I know a little bit less, in fact, quite a bit less than Alex does about this, but we'll just have a general discussion about how you would like to see us approach graphics over the coming shows. Are there topics that you're interested in having brought to the front? Are there things that we did in the past that we're not doing now that you'd like to reinvigorate, so to speak? Wednesdays will be still in this subject, and I know Alex is particularly interested in 3D and photogrammetry and those things, and so they kind of wrap into this. Mitch Hill has some thoughts. Mitchell?
Yeah, I would suggest a category on what we were just talking about a little bit ago, Cinema 4D. I've tried to make it my point this summer to learn, deep dive into it. So it'd be good to have an expert on Cinema 3D or 4D and other 3D programs to come on board and talk to us about it.
One of the things I've always been impressed with, and I've just played with things like even motion, they're so deep. You could literally, I mean, the number of layers down, I thought this $59 program was going to be pretty rudimentary, and it turned out to be anything but. And I can only imagine the levels of complexity that live inside serious 3D compositing and 3D creation tools. So I would imagine there will be tons of discussions there. And of course, we have these new technologies, like things that we hadn't dealt with a lot, like photogrammetry and 3D modeling and character animation. And we've had people on talking about these things, and I think they're fascinating new technologies that are going to be the future. But it looks like nobody else has a hand raised for that, so let's get into some of the questions we've had.
Olivier Richard from Saigon, Vietnam. He would like to, we need a video into the cloud 101 lab, please.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, I'm not sure. Well, if it's not specifically for graphics, if you're talking about live graphics, and of course, graphics are a part of video, we might want to bring that up tomorrow as well and have an equivalent discussion about how we put regular video up. We had questions today about where it was stored, how much bandwidth is required. We do know that, these services out there like Frame.io and other things are helping us push the cloud storage of video content as an increasing reality through the course of our lives. So it'll be interesting to talk about. Olivia, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've been asking this question because I was listening to Guy and Jonas before, and I really like to start understanding what actually they were talking about. I had the feeling they were talking about a book in chapter 57, and I'd like to start reading the preface of it, or or chapter 1. And I was. That's the origin of my question. It's where do I find chapter 1 of this topic?
That resonates with me because I used to run users groups a lot, and we always had this issue of the new people coming in needed basic training. Then they advance and they get to the intermediate level, and they're still interested in the same things. But those same people over the course of a year or two later become advanced, and then they get bored with the new beginner content of the people coming in there. And so it's this process of consistently making productions viable for a variety of different learners at different levels in their career. So I think this is always something it's always worth it to think about how you make the 101 level stuff accessible to people who might be way beyond that, while still making it seem like I'm not completely out of my league the first time I show up. Guy Cochran has thoughts on this. Guy?
Yeah, we did do a 101 type class with AWS, and we put together 3 days of, it was 3 Fridays of AWS, so an hour on each one of those, which is found on the Office Hours global site. If you just type in the search AWS, it's one of the second hours that it'll pop up. But yeah, the information there is still totally relevant. Nothing's really changed, which is surprising. But I would start there, and we'd like to do something, but a lot of the guys are back to work. It's like they're out there implementing and using this stuff, and so to get like a Jonas or Tucker, this is like a 50-hour type thing to put together. The last one took a lot of work. There was a lot of late night burning the midnight oil, literally up to midnight, putting the contents together, which I'm sure you teach. So yeah, if there's enough demand, I'm game to help put something together.
Yeah, and we use the technologies we talk about and focus on the technologies we use, but it's also useful to get back. Like, I don't really know the difference between how AWS functions versus Akamai or any of those other kind of global cloud platforms, what the pluses and minuses are, and I don't know if that's something that people are interested in or whether we want to just focus on what we use because that's what we know. Both of those are perfectly, in my mind, reasonable approaches. Let's move on to the next question.
And it's from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Mitch Hill, whoever that is, speaks highly of NewBlue Titler. I've used it for a few years and find creating content with it tedious and slow on a Mac. Suggestions?
John Preto's going to address this first.
I'm on a Mac with NewBlue, and I'm not a fan. I don't like it.
And Mitchell.
I honestly have not used it with an M1 Mac, so I can't speak to the speed. As far as categories go, I think that talking about graphics, specifically doing lower thirds, creating graphics that support sporting events or political voting, things like that, that might be a good category to consider. And NewBlue would be one of the companies that makes software to do that. And we have some other options too.
It's interesting. Most titlers came out of the broadcast television industry, and they were kind of constrained. The first titlers I used had to toss it into that standard definition 640 or maybe 720 if it was digitally sourced by 480 raster. So you had big fat fonts with big edges and things like that because that's all you could really make clear on broadcast television in the early days. We've moved so far away from that in the new era. And so much of our eyeball time is now spent on computers rather than watching television screens that it makes sense that there's a lot of evolving thinking that goes into this. I know I've had had long discussions with clients about, you're telling me you want a dark drop shadow, but in the next scene, everything goes dark, and the function of that is not the same as it was before. And we have to try to figure out a way, do we change the drop shadow to make legibility increase, or do we have to find a different technique, some sort of a background behind the piece of text to make sure that it stays relevant for the audience in different sizes and things. There's just a ton to talk about here. Mitchell's going to go next, then Guy Cochran.
Already have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't have that clicked off. Guy Cochran.
Yeah, I actually like NewBlue Titler a lot for the fact that there's templates that you can modify. So it gives you a ton of ideas, and as you start to take the colors of the logos out of somebody's palette, you can eye drop and pick that color to match and start to look like your own show. But it at least gives you the basis. The other thing that I like is that it can do NDI and NDI over alpha. And so what I like is we put it on a big, huge Wacom 24-inch tablet with the touch-enabled one. And so we put all those graphics, and we could just tap them, and then with another keystroke, you can fire them off. So it's just depending on how you want to roll it into your workflow. So we use vMix over NDI, so those graphics come in as an alpha. So it's a really smooth workflow. So it just depends, again, on how you're using it and if it's helpful or not. But it is expensive if you get... So that's the other part, is I don't know which package you're using, because you can go and get all these big templates, which cost a lot of money, but time's money. It's just, do you want to design those things yourself painstakingly in After Effects? Because you can go that route. To me, you could even, get some of those templates and rebuild them in After Effects if you find something that you really like.
I also have to say that having been absolutely ignorant about typography when I started in the advertising business decades ago, and sitting at the side of people who take typography very seriously, and there are legions of designers out there who take typography very seriously. When you get down into the weeds, this is as deep a subject as I've ever come across. They will take 20 different versions of the Helvetica face and have hour-long discussions comparing each one against another for weeks at a time. And it's mind-boggling how much care and effort someone like an art director for a major advertising agency spends of their life trying to find the fit between the right type, both technically and emotionally, to get a reaction they want out of an audience. It's just an amazing subject. So, yeah, I'm all for making that. I'm sure that will be a discussion topic among the graphics discussions. Next question.
Olivia Richard is back from Saigon, Vietnam. Can we have new labs on Zoom 101?
So this is another 101 question. I think the answer, I'm not speaking for Alex here, but I'm thinking that, he's always tried to balance bringing people along who are not familiar with topics and making that possible for people who don't want to get things dumbed down too much so that you're just rehashing the same old areas again and again. But yeah, Zoom is our platform of choice here. We have amazing amounts of expertise. And so I would think that there's certainly plenty of expertise in the office hours cadre to talk to Zoom on whatever level, up to and including the highest possible levels in our community. Olivier, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know what you think, would be nice to put on the website on office hours. .global, a 101 chapter where we can have 101 of video, 101 of sound, 101 of Zoom, 101 of... So people like me, newbies, could get there and drink as much as we can, because it's drinking from the fire hose sometime. That's what it feels. That
resonates with me tremendously. I will say that good tutorials, no matter where you find them, took a lot of time and effort for somebody to distill information, even things that look like the simplest things. And even somebody who just comes on and says, I'm just turning on my camera and I'm going to train you about this. If it turns out to be really good, there was quite a lot of preparation that person did to manage to achieve that. If the lady pops up and explains something crisply and clearly and you can follow it and get to the end, she's one of a select cadre of people who can do that. It's just as equally possible to find training the way that I do it sometimes when I don't have time to prepare, which is I'll just start talking about it and I get distracted by this thing and that thing and I go off on tangents and I don't pull it together into something that's really efficient as a piece of training. And so we always want to try to present anything that comes out of office hours more like the worked on and carefully planned piece than on the just I'm talking about it. Both can be valuable, but one is certainly usually more efficient than the other. Let's go on to the next topic.
John Foltz from Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania is back. Jonas, is it possible to send a playout B signal to a BlackMagic Decklink card and use that SDI output with a switcher?
Is Jonas gone yet? It looks like Jonas is gone here, so sorry about that, but Dennis Champion Walker is going to take a shot at it.
Yes, so that's exactly how our video is making it to you right now. On the Macs that are running the system, that each of those has a Decklink card taking 4 outputs from Zoom ISO and sending it into the switcher. So you'd be able to do exactly the same with Playout B.
And Courtney has something to say about this.
Yeah, if you're running the Playout B on a Mac or a PC, you can use the Decklink card, but it's kind of overkill if you're running it on a Raspberry Pi, because the output of the Pi is HDMI. Just use the standard, our old friend, the MDHX, and you do have a graphic of it there, because it will take the HDMI output, convert it to SDI, and take it into a switcher, and it'll handle more things. It'll be easier to configure for whatever flavor of SDI input your switcher requires, because some of them require, that it be interlaced or 1080p or 4K. So you have to take that into account. And Playout B coming out of a Mac will work fine, but you're tying up a computer to do it. You don't necessarily have to when you can use the Pi Playout B and an MDHX and get into a switcher with either HDMI or SDI, and it'll scale it and change the frame rate to match whatever your switcher needs.
Okay, Mitch, next question.
And Lenny Nelson from San Antonio.
Yeah, no, let's go ahead and go on to the next. I'm sorry, Dennis, I missed you there, but we've recycled the system, so let's go on to Lenny.
Lenny Nelson from San Antonio, Texas. Discussion about adaptive responsive graphics and prepping for non-standard aspect ratios.
Boy, that's going to be an increasing problem. Once upon a time, we had the American Broadcast Standard and the CCAM and I can't remember the other one, PAL standards, and that was all we had to design for, at least in broadcast graphics. Now, with the web, we've got so many competing quote standards, vertical, horizontal, square, God knows what else that you're having to deal with. So it becomes more and more difficult. I will say that I have been fascinated. I've been spending a little time on Ken Jordan's web training tutorials that are on Office Hour Global, and he talks a good bit about adaptive design as it relates to websites, and I found that fascinating. So that's one place you can look for to get some beginning thoughts on creating design constructs that work well vertically and horizontally and in different things. Dennis, did you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, and it's a lot more difficult to do this in video than it would be on a web page, because obviously with a web page, it can just adapt each time it's rendered. Whereas when you're sending video out, it's going to be at whatever aspect ratio it happens to be. And so if you want to then turn it into, for example, 9:16 for a phone, you're going to be losing a lot of the image. And in order to make graphics safe for that, they're basically going to have to be a strip in the middle. This was something that I think Alex was talking about a few days ago on Office Hours. And essentially what it would mean is that you would have to have two different sets of graphics, one for people watching in 16:9 and another for those watching in 9:16.
Yeah, and some of you in the audience may be why we're so obsessive about getting our heads framed right. And it's for these kinds of ideas. We all want our heads to be in the same area because we're doing super sources and cut downs and various aspects ratios. You see the show switched, and paying attention to framing for more than just a shot that's transitory and may change it takes a lot of thinking. Let's move on to the next question.
Lenny Nelson is back from San Antonio. With viewing devices now having processing power, ideas about simply sending metadata for graphics and having the device render personalized for the native screen.
I don't know much about this subject, although it sounds fascinating. Courtney, do you want to dive in on this?
Well, the problem there is standardization. Because now this is becoming more and more of a problem, and you might look into do some research on ATSC3, because ATSC3 is the next broadcast standard, and they may have some way of dealing with that because it deals with interactive data and as well as streaming and things like that. So different types of displays to portable devices as well. The problem you have right now would be, about the only way to do it now would be to send it as closed captioning, because that information is contained in metadata and can be displayed on almost all television devices and computer devices these days that support closed captioning. Now, getting fancy graphics in that, probably not possible. I don't know of the closed captioning systems, if they have a place where you can put a bug or a web graphic in that's persistent over the output that comes from the closed captioning system and overlays it. But that's about the only thing I know of that does it across all platforms and across all objects and hardware.
I would imagine it's a pretty difficult thing to, everybody's paying attention to this. And everybody understands that, video used to be horizontal only. Now we're watching it on phones. So when we turn our phone from horizontal to vertical, that is not going to fit. You're either going to punch out a piece of the video, and if you have text on a lower third, for example, that's going to mess that up, or you're going to scale the text. If you have some agile adaptive thing, you're going to scale it down a lot to fit that original widescreen into a narrow screen suddenly, and that risks making it unintelligible for whoever's watching the show because it just gets too small. So I'm sure there are big minds working on all this and trying to find the best way to allow for these new realities that we're all facing. But it's going to be, I think, a while before it all gets settled out. Let's go on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael, since the worlds of lighting and video graphics are converging, what would you think of a second hour on integrating lighting with media or even basic lighting design?
I think that's a good topic, and I think we might end up doing that on Thursdays a good little bit. Thursday is, at least at the moment, set up to be kind of a video-focused show, and all video is a recording of the light reflected off of something. So we will be, I'm sure, delving deeply into the idea of lighting in all of its aspects, field lighting, studio lighting, using portable lights to make good video pictures. So I think that'll be a part of what we talk about on Thursday, whether or not that's integrated, and I'm sure it will be integrated into the graphics discussions on Wednesday, because lighting is one of the biggest aspects of 3D design. In fact, it very much defines the realism of scene is getting the lighting right. So I'm pretty sure that that's going to be a big piece of it, but good topic to bring up here. Let's move on to the next one.
Peter Belbin from Houston, Texas. I'd like to see a Caspar CG-related second-hour series with perhaps something with people focused on back-end and others providing tooling for specific use cases like front-end and other tooling. Examples are SPX, Lupic, and others.
Dennis is going to deal with this. Dennis?
Yes, so SPX is how we are now displaying graphics in office hours. And I think, it would be great for us to have a dive into how that system works. And it is using Caspar CG, which then allows us to key items over. So where you see an object with the supersource background, that blue map of the world, that is being done that way. I think a deep dive into how all of this works and how the graphic system that we're now using functions would be a great topic.
Absolutely. And we have incredible expertise in our community for how to do this. I would say planetary class expertise. So next question.
Nathan GS in Singapore. What software would you use to create and run graphics and video for a stage backdrop projection screen? Something like Pro Presenter would be ideal?
John Preto's going to start us out.
This sounds like a perfect job for QLab, because QLab is set to be scheduled on a rundown for like a play. So that's what I would look at.
And Courtney?
Depends on your budget. What a lot of the bigger systems use something called program and hardware called Watch Out, which is designed for doing projection mapping and blending between different projectors into a single image or on a LED video wall. It takes many inputs and maps them into different locations and spots and synchronizes to SMPTE time code or click tracks. Something like that. It's a heinously expensive system, so I wouldn't suggest going into it if you're on a do-it-yourself budget. ProPresenter can work okay for handling multiple displays. It's designed primarily for the house of worship. It was originally designed to support that. So it's keyed more to that type of environment. And if that's the environment you're going to be in, it would definitely be a good choice for you. The more expensive, like the concert lighting systems the concert systems that use the giant LED walls, all use the more expensive, like Watch Out, or there's a couple of other video wall programs that are used for managing multiple video inputs and putting them up on that video wall and blending them and based on time code or other types of theatrical cue systems.
Resolume is one.
Yeah, Resolume is pretty big in the marketplace.
I couldn't think of the name. Thank you, John.
Another thing you might want to do, if you just want to dip your toes into this, do a Google search on VJ, VEEJAY. People who do a lot of concert on the low-end stuff have iOS apps, or I would guess similar things for the Samsung ecosystem, that allow you to design kind of backgrounds and throw them up behind your band. VJ systems are known for being pretty ecumenical and taking in a lot of different kinds of graphics and things, because often people in a live show environment want to have crazy stuff behind the band to make it more visually exciting. They're not as sophisticated at all as these professional playout systems we've been discussing before. But again, if you're relatively new to it and don't want to spend a lot, you can investigate what's available by just doing a search on that term in Google, and it'll throw up some inexpensive and often even free programs that'll let you get your feet wet. Let's move on to the next question.
Bo Cordell, Charleston, South Carolina. Unreal Engine is reportedly expanding its capabilities as a CG-style graphics engine. Would love to have someone from Unreal speak on this.
We have done quite a lot of training on Unreal and have our guru, Nick Justitian from Drexel University, has come in and actually kind of schooled us and run projects for us. We just barely missed getting an Unreal Engine system going for the rocket launch that was, you got very close but didn't quite get off the ground, unlike the rocket that absolutely got off the ground. But it was really fascinating. And boy, the pace of development in the Unreal Engine space has been amazing. So yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. And I'm sure, I can almost guarantee you, that Alex will have that as part of the CG 3D graphics Wednesdays coming up in the future. Let's go on to the next question.
Mickey Makachor from Manila, Philippines. Second hour on the psychology behind layouts, color palettes, and animations built in and out of graphics. The why, not the how. Mr. Gallner has hinted on his brilliance on this topic over the years.
We have done things where Alex Gollner, our friend at Alex 4D, who is out of London and has been a part of office hours since the early days, speaks eloquently and brilliantly on this, and I'm sure we could manage to get Alex popping back in on things. There is so much. I mean, I was talking about fonts and things like that before, and Alex is one of those people who has been designing broadcast fonts for large organizations. I know he's worked with the BBC and others in England and has incredible expertise in how to put graphics into any kind of moving imagery stream. So yeah, I'm sure that Alex will be persuadable, depending on his schedule, of course, to come back in and give us some help in those things. So good suggestion, Mickey. And I don't know who's taking notes about this one, but yeah, definitely keep that in mind. Next one up.
David Brady, New York, New York. I'd suggest a workshop for building a style guide for your brand. At work, there's a proper guide for logo, font, color, uses, variations, and building templates. I find it's extremely useful in staying on point with a brand.
And in corporate America, this is the law. It's the rules. You don't design anything until you're familiar with the style guide for a particular brand. It's part of branding, which is a subset of the whole marketing field philosophy, and brand guides are incredibly specific to the point where they will tell you, if you're going to use the logo on a horizontal layout, it must be in this position, it must be at a minimum of this size or a maximum of that size, and so on and so forth, page after page after page after page. I've seen brand books that were literally 350 pages of that kind of detail. And you think it's, overkill, but when you think about the absolute economic power of some brands. I mean, you see the Nike swoosh or the shape of a Coke bottle or the arches of McDonald's, and it immediately triggers something in you. And if they dilute that brand by suddenly putting up green arches rather than yellow arches for McDonald's, it doesn't have the same trigger thing that make people feel something. Now, you may not like McDonald's and that might be negative, but for obviously most of the world, that says you're going to get a particular food experience. And if that's what you're looking for, that's where it is. And that has power, economic power. Dennis Champion Walker and then Mitchell Hill is going to weigh in on this. Dennis?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that Mike Emmett created the Office Hours style guide, so it might be worth getting him to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is terrible of me. I'm confessing, I didn't even know he had one. And that is awesome. And I think, I would definitely think that's kind of bringing it home. And the fact that there's somebody in our system who can talk about how they created the style guide and what it does would be fabulous. Mitchell?
Yeah, don't underestimate the importance of style guides and corporate people and how things get approved, because the first thing they're going to look at, they may not know about editing and rules of thirds and things like that, but they do know that if their logo isn't exactly positioned with the exact color, with the exact words and all that indicia information they put on there, they're going to flag you. So it is very, very important, even though it might seem somewhat draconian.
Well, it's no small thing. You're pitching a company, and the first question they ask is that our blue? You're in trouble already. You haven't done anything else. And if you didn't understand that their blue is PMS, whatever it is, and you use something outside of that, somebody around that table will know and call you out on it. So,
and the other thing to keep in mind when you're doing that, sorry, Bill, is that many, many, many people and committees and conferences have already been done and finished on deciding what that style guide. So if you have an idea in your head, well, it would be better if I flew this logo in and did this little thing, forget it. It's already been considered and rejected.
Yeah, so it's real interesting. This is part of an overall bigger thing, branding for companies, and it affects the bottom line. In fact, big companies carry goodwill as a line item on their gigantic balance sheets, and that is the consistent public perception of their brand and what it means. And they are very, very protective about it. So protective that I remember being a young radio guy, and if there were, God forbid, some air accident out there, you just had a standing order. All advertising that has anything to do with flying gets immediately pulled off because nobody wants their brand associated next to that. And it's equivalent. I'm not picking on the flying industry. There's tons of that kind of, if anything happens negative in our area of business, all our ads must be pulled immediately until we get past that thing and we approve putting them back on the air. That's pretty normal. Dennis Champion Walker wants to come back in on this.
Yeah, as we talked about it, we have the style guide, and Josh has got it ready to show us. So it covers everything from the colors that we use, the layouts on screen, how all of this works with the website as well, for example. So you can see large quantities of detail there.
Absolutely. And one thing people who don't deal with these all the time, it's not just the logo color, but approved colors for the primary graphics, secondary, tertiary. If you're going to use text and color, these are the acceptable. There's just so much specificity. And I think you saw there was a graphic that had a red bar through it. They will tell you not only what you must do, but what you cannot do. And that's a well-designed style guide. They don't want to leave any room for mistake because it's important.
Yeah, I saw it. I made the style guide there as an example of how not to slouch when you're in the 3-up.
Yeah. Well, that's what people, why are we so crazy about wanting to do a head guide and things like that? And you just saw the best example of what that is. I mean, if someone's a little bit out of frame because we're getting a little tired and we're slouching, it is not as professional a moment. Now, every one of us here on camera does this over and over. We're not really signaling, pointing at Courtney because we've all done it. And I've also taken screen grabs and realized at that moment, I look like that. And I'm, oh my God, I'm hoping that somebody on the back end is not grabbing that frame and using it as the exemplar. So
it's on YouTube now.
Thanks.
Lost that battle.
I knew I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, let's move on.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. If we were to use a second hour for testing interactive graphic overlays, possibilities, past or QR codes, cards on YouTube, etc.
Well, interactive on video is an interesting subject. I've been interested in it for a long time because I work in the advertising fields, and we've had endless debates about whether you should use QR codes, whether anybody actually grabs their phone and has enough time to shoot a QR code to get links to some place that you want them to go to. It's an ongoing discussion. I do think it's an interesting topic to talk about. There's more and more of that possible. Courtney, do you have something to
Yeah, I don't know if we can do a second hour on it because Alex hates QR codes in videos. So I don't know if he'll.
Yeah, I understand that they have the idea. I want people to come from this content and go to something that is beneficial, hopefully for them. I mean, often QR codes are designed to, I want you to go someplace beneficial to me so I can sell you something. And I certainly understand his circumstance, pulling people out of a stream that they're enjoying to go someplace so that you can sell them in a private room is maybe not the highest level of audience serving. But the fact that you can direct people to something used properly can help that flow of knowledge. I mean, I can see somebody putting up, we're going to be talking about this website or whatever. So here's a QR code. And if you want to go to the website on your phone, you can do that while we continue here to discuss what you're seeing on a secondary device. I can see that being a useful thing. Olivier wants to get in on this, and then so does Courtney. Olivier?
Yeah, it was a conversation we had a few days ago with Asmukin, who wanted to produce another book, for a cooking book for his wife, and he was wondering about the use of pages and multimedia things inside. And we arrived to a conclusion that everything is fine as long as you have an internet connection and you're online and you're available to do that. We came to the conclusion that if he should do that, the entire recipe and procedure should be clear on the page. And if you want extra detail, then flash the QR code on your phone, which is going to take you there as an extra bonus, extra information, but it's not the meat of the information. It's not the core. And if you choose not to use it, the content which is there is perfectly fine to help you going along the way.
Yeah, that resonates with me as a strategy for the deployment of it. Don't make them a requirement to get the information you want, because a large number of people will never go there. Courtney, your thoughts?
Yeah, maybe the second hour could explain why when I'm viewing YouTube videos on my big screen TV and I have them full screen, the person always goes, well, for more information, click the link there and click the link over there for, to take you to my website. And I never see any links appear on the screen. So I'm perplexed as to how YouTube handles those supposed embedded graphics that have links to other sites, because they never show up on my TV, which I couldn't click on anyway. So it's curious as to how that's going to work. And the ones that, and click on the link in the description if you want more information. And of course, when you're playing it on a television YouTube player and a YouTube app that's playing on a Android television or a Apple TV, you don't see those links.
Yeah, that's always a question. Is the experience you're designing for the same experience that the end user is going to have? And that's a good example, Courtney, of how they're expecting you to see this on a computer where clickable links are a thing, but you've got it on your big screen TV or what, and there are no clickable links. So that has to be taken into consideration. Good point. All right, next question.
Robert Shoji from Los Angeles. How about using graphics with the ATEM Mini products as a second hour topic?
Dennis, you had some thoughts?
Indeed. Before we started using SPX to do the graphics on office hours, that was how I was doing them through my ATEM. So yeah, I reckon we could easily do a second hour on that.
I think so many of us use ATEM minis that almost anything that can help people use them. It's been a wildly popular product. And I don't ever remember working in an environment where I could imagine that everyone watching a show or everyone participating in a show would have their own desktop video mixer. But boy, we got here fast after the Zoom revolution accompanied the pandemic. So yeah, interesting. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, when is Resolume Arena a better choice than a Resolume Avenue?
Ooh, John Preto, you have thoughts on Resolume stuff?
Yeah, I run Resolume Arena for my projection mapping for my Christmas show, and the Arena product is a higher level product, enterprise. Avenue is like 300, and for the first time in a long time, the dollar equals a euro right now, which is pretty amazing. So $300 for Avenue is $700, $800 for Arena. Arena has all the projection mapping, has DMX. It's for the larger show. So that's the difference between the two.
I saw that currency equivalent this morning. I thought, what a nice. I get a couple of days at least of rest where I don't have to do any translation in my head. Oh yeah, 300 Europe's $300, same thing. Let's move on to the next one.
Bo Cordell, Charleston, South Carolina. I'd love more time spent on HDR and how it relates to graphic creation. How do we build a graphic in Photoshop that gets interpreted by video programs as being HDR?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are dealing with that. HDR is moving more and more out there. I think Alex made the point, and I support it, that the fact that these pocket phones are moving into the HDR space so readily is changing things. It's no longer a niche technology. It's more and more of a mainstream technology. I know I'm shooting probably 50% of my projects now in HDR because they're coming off my phone rather than the Blackmagic 6K. And in 6K, working with RAW is more of a workflow hassle. On my phone, HDR and Final Cut talk each other's flags perfectly. And so it's a really simple process to both capture and manipulate, staying in the same pipeline, but that's going to get more and more. I also noticed that we're down to our last question or two here. So if you want us to finish up a little early, we were happy to do that. If you have other questions and you want to toss them in the next couple of minutes, if you want us to keep going more toward the top of the hour, again, we had Alex wasn't available today, so I'm just sitting in, and he would have had much more expertise in a lot of these areas. So we're doing the best we can. Courtney has a thought on this.
Well, just to fill out this question on HDR for graphics use, I think it's overkill. You don't need 1,000 nits of light in your lower third, because it's going to be distracting and you're going to blind the person that's there. You want to keep your lower third graphics less obtrusive, and having high dynamic range might make them more obtrusive, you're combining the graphics with a regular video image that's HDR. I guess you have to take into account so that the blacks don't get crushed, or that you have subtle detail in your lower third graphics. I don't think you want to go for that kind of stuff that's going to get lost if it's played back on something that doesn't support HDR. So I think you want your graphics, your on-screen graphics, to be more universally adaptable to all types of displays, rather than specifically taking advantage of the HDR space.
Courtney, that brings to mind, Dennis, you're doing that for this show, which is always looking at HDR down the road. Has your thinking changed about levels of brightness in graphics because you're working kind of for both HDR and SDR? Has that been part of your thinking?
So I was wondering about that, but in fact, I asked a question about this on Sunday, I think, and Alex's answer was that we're going to have an FS-HDR that will process the graphics back down to what would be considered the sort of normal SDR levels when they're played through HDR. And that way, it's essentially, if you just play the image as it is normally, it's going to be far too bright. So it needs to be adjusted before it's played out into an HDR system so that it looks right.
But that device will do the trans, it's not really transcoding, the trans level setting, I guess, whatever it might be.
Well, it would effectively just be applying a LUT so that it darkens everything down to the level whereby when it's in HDR, it then looks to be the correct level.
So some clamping code that says do not exceed this instead of do not exceed this. You were in HD space and HDR space. Now you're in SDR space. Interesting.
Yeah.
Mitch Hill had some thoughts.
Yeah, it sort of brings up the issue of people need to know why they need HDR, because right now I don't think anybody, or at least not anybody, but the average person doesn't know what HDR is and why they need it. And therefore, we kind of have to follow that, because if we're going to supply content, there needs to be a consumer out there. So perhaps a HDR segment as part of the graphics thing, so that we can do exactly what Dennis was just talking about, and have things that are compatible that can go either to standard or to HDR levels.
I will say that I've been shooting the last 2 or 3 projects that I've gotten paid for. I've shot on my phone, and I've kept it in HDR mode, and it is a distinct quality boost perceptually for my clients. I'm getting stuff that comes out, particularly the real world exterior shots, that the capture of a higher dynamic range, particularly if you're in a park or you're somewhere outdoors with beautiful few clouds against the blue skies, the saturation levels, just the level of detail that it's capturing in an HDR mode, even when it's mapped to SDR for the final output, has been a qualitative boost. Clients are going, wow, this stuff looks beautiful. So it's leading me more and more to shoot in those formats than I would have thought would have been possible. Particularly because they've made it with the Apple system and what I do. I'm a Final Cut editor, but I'm sure there are equivalent things happening on the other side of things.
I don't question the quality difference. I just think that people need to understand why they want it, because it could go the way of 3D graphics on your TV if we don't properly support it and give plenty of demonstrations so that the end user can decide that's a benefit.
Yeah, and what Dennis was talking about in terms of something automated back there that does a LUT for it, that makes it a invoke LUT and everything will be fine on the back end is much better than, oh gosh, I have to send it to Charles and he has to do a grade for HDR and a grade for SDR and I have to put out multiple versions of the thing and find a way through the web to get somebody on this device to get to the right copy of that. That's a system that is too unwieldy and I don't think will ever work. But if it can be made easier and more automated, there is a qualitative difference that I've seen. That's just my personal experience. Let's move on to the next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Telestrating on the ATEMs, there seems to be at least 3 to 4 good methods.
And Alex, again, has talked about this a good little bit, and he and others here on the panel, I'm not one of them, so I don't know much to say about this, and unless somebody else has experience with telestrator workflows out of a little ATEM Mini that are easy, I will be there and be present and pay attention when we talk about it, because I'd like to do more of it, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. So we're going to have to go on to, John Preto wants to pop in on this.
I telestrate from my iPad. I use Procreate, and then I run green background on Procreate, and then I chroma key it. You could chroma key it on the ATEM. The thing is that Alex has an advantage because he can see the video on top of his what's the pad called? The Wacom tablet.
Right.
And you can't do that not with Procreate. You can't see what you're writing on top of.
So you're essentially telestrating blind. You're thinking, I think I need to circle something. It's about here on my Wacom. And and he's actually able to see the head that he wants to circle, which would be a far easier thing to do. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, next question.
Bobby Rafferty from Central Florida. Is converting HDR to SDR called tone mapping?
I suspect that there may be some differences inside of there, but I expect in general, tone mapping, I would think, would be taking levels of brightness and or color information and using those lookup tables to map one thing to another. Dennis Champion Walker may have a better answer.
Yes, is the short answer.
Okay, good. So, you thought I was being careful because I don't want to say anything and look too dumb about that, but I'm pretty dumb about that. So we're in good shape. Next question.
Greg Greckmeyer from Topping, Virginia. Opinions on lower third graphics with a lot of movement when loading. Guidelines for when the graphic must be fully loaded and when movement should stop.
And we're going to start with John Preto for this one, then go to Mitch Hill, and then go to Courtney Gooden. And John can take it away.
I would say less is more, but I defer to Alex Gollner. He does this for a living for the last 20 years. So I would love to have him. He did a discussion once on Second Hour, I think, about this kind of topic.
Mitch Hill.
I'm with John on this. I think that the TV channels, especially the news operations, they're going crazy. They're just absolutely losing their minds with dancing graphics and lower thirds and bugs that come up. And when you're watching TV and you're into a very, very intense scene, I don't want to see some creature crawling up the screen and telling me that Discovery Network has some show with a circle graphic and then crabs, doing this. It's just so distracting. So please stop the insanity.
Courtney.
Yeah, I agree with Mitch on the distracting graphics with where you see the entire cast of the upcoming show, appearing at the bottom, and you're trying to go, does that have anything to do with this newscast? But I think if you're going to talk about animated lower thirds, animating in and animating out, I think they should not be longer than 1 second on the animation in, because, by the time you get to the information that you're going to display, it's, the director may have cut to somebody else. So you have to deal with the fact that, every second of animation takes time out of on the screen of displaying that information to the person to see. So if you're going to display a person's name or something, I say get it up there right away. You could maybe have it wipe in, but definitely less than 1 second. And you can have it wipe out because that's not quite as important. But it does kind of cramp the cutting style of the TD by limiting how long they have to stay on a person to let the lower third display.
Olivier.
I don't know if it's something which has to do with our time, but even when we do SuperSource and when I watch SuperSource, very often the background is animated. And what's wrong with something still? Right now with the conflicts in Ukraine, you see in the news when someone is explaining a situation, you have the same clip which lasts 20 seconds running in circle. And over the course of 2 minutes explanation, you've seen the same clip 4 times. And it's tiring. I went from when I was 20 driving my car with very loud music inside to now not listening to any radio in my car at all, because I just want to remove this noise pollution I have around me all the time, just to rest a little bit. And so with the lower third, it's exactly the same thing. What's wrong with aerial fonts? That's my 2 cents.
I think a piece of that, and I'm coming around to thinking about this more and more. We know that broadcast is on the wane a little bit. More people are spending more time with their eyeballs on devices, sometimes consuming broadcast on their devices, but not always, consuming tons of other stuff. And the rise of this crazy, I've got 32 messages across a TV screen, seemed to me to accelerate about the same time I started seeing the news stuff in airports a lot. And I sometimes key it to the fact that they must have had some data that a lot of people, particularly during the day, were watching, that as many or more people were exposed to their content on the move rather than sitting and watching, and that they were trying to constantly put rotating, headliney or interesting, compelling pictures up there with as much frequency as possible, because I knew they could only catch eyeballs for a little bit of time. I might be overthinking of this, but it just seems like there's no other reason to have 25 pieces of information other than to think, well, this gives us 25 times to attract somebody and make them watch this for a couple of minutes. And I wholeheartedly agree that when you're in the circumstance where you're in your living room watching your TV, it's nothing but annoying as opposed to informationally satisfying for me. Courtney, you wanted to get back in on this? Oh, Mitchell did. I'm sorry, Mitchell.
That's all right. I'm sure Courtney has something he'd like to say too, but it's nothing more than digital Post-it notes. And somewhere along the line, somebody decided that this was a great way to promote other things that are going on our channel, or just multi-layer the information that they provide to you. And I think with the exception of maybe stock quotes, generally I think it just needs to be static and stay out of the way, because all things need to have a reason. I think Alex would sell this idea, Alex Goldner, that if he's going to move it, there's a reason he's moving that graphic and doing this, because it needs to make way for this or that. But even on our program, sometimes if there's an exchange going on between Alex and, say, Chris, for example, the lower third comes up and it builds and does this lower third thing. And before it's even had a chance to finish, it's sliding off the screen, and the next person comes up and it just establishes that it's Alex. It's very awkward to have this stuff going on when we're switching between two people having communication. There's a time and a place for it, I guess is what I'm saying. The lower third bugs that go over here with the dancing people, never a reason to have that.
Yeah, this all resonates with me too. I will say, though, it's not a defense of the idea, but I did notice that when my son was 12, 13, 14, 15, I remember walking into the living room one day and he was literally there was a TV show like Law and Order or something like that on one side. There was his computer on his belly as he was doing something else. He had his phone in his left hand, and I think he might have had an iPad someplace else. And he was time sharing on those 4 sources. And on some of them, like his phone, he was having a real-time conversation with somebody. And I just thought, he can't be doing this. So I asked him something about the television show, and he was actually following the story there. And I thought, oh my gosh, I am consuming data at a different speed than my 14-year-old son is. And I do think there is more people are conditioned to more input more often now and can somehow parse that out in ways that I couldn't. So I do think that's another contributing factor. sometimes content creators just don't want to bore you, so they know like the pace of editing movies, right? An action thriller, you're not getting to see that explosion in 1 3-second or 3-minute shot. That's not at all possible. There have to be 400 angles of the explosion in slow-mo and a different angle and with different things flying. And the pace of scenes being fed to us continues to accelerate. That's just part of life these days, like it or not. All right, I think we've come pretty close to the end here. Thank you all for sticking with us today. I appreciate it. I think I will be back tomorrow to do the video thing, and I'm very much looking forward to getting everybody's ideas about what kinds of video content they would like us to concentrate on here at Office Hours in the future coming up. Once again, we want to thank everybody who participated, all the panelists who are here today. And I want to specifically mention all the people whose names you will see in the end credit roll. We're about to launch that. And there are a lot of people who put a lot of time and effort into making these shows possible every single day. So if you can stick around through the credit roll and just acknowledge some of the people who have put in their time and effort to make this possible, we'd appreciate it. All that says, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Whispering begins.
It's whispering time. Good job, Bill. Thank you. I wondered if we were going to get to the end. I looked up.
Aren't we done with a whisper?
We had 3 questions with like 8 or 9 minutes. Now I could have ended early, and I thought
had some
it.
queued up, Bill, to stretch.
But actually, I'm glad. Olivier, that answer you gave to the aviation question, that was brilliant, and I'm so glad I didn't dive out right before that.
Was it?
Well, I learned something, and I got an insight into an area that I wouldn't normally get to see. And that's one of the things I love about the diversity of our panels. We get so many people from so many different backgrounds.
Goodbye, folks.
And I was able to learn something about that.
Yeah, I wonder why the Airbus never crashes every day.
Ooh.